My name is Dulce Whitford, and I'm 28 years old. For 20 years, my parents called me the slow one while my sister, Miranda, collected Harvard degrees and inheritance promises. They mocked my dyslexia at dinner tables, excluded me from family decisions, and paid me a fraction of what they paid her. But on Miranda's graduation day at the Plaza Hotel, in front of 350 guests, a stranger handed me an envelope that would expose every lie my parents had ever told about me. What they didn't know was that Grandma Eleanor had been watching. She had seen everything. And she had left me something that would flip the entire Whitford empire upside down. The Whitfords were old money Manhattan, the kind of family whose name appeared on hospital wings and museum plaques. My father, Gerald Whitford, ran Whitford Properties, a commercial real estate empire my grandmother, Eleanor, had built from a single Brooklyn office in 1965. By 2024, the company was valued at $92 million. I was born with dyslexia and diagnosed at 7. The letters on the page would swim and rearrange themselves, turning simple sentences into puzzles that took me 3 times longer to solve than they did other kids. My parents' response wasn't support. It was shame. When I was 12, they hired tutors for Miranda, paid for violin lessons at Juilliard, French immersion classes, and SAT preparation with a Princeton graduate who charged $400 an hour. When I asked for help with my reading, my mother, Priscilla, simply sighed. Dulce, we've already spent so much on specialists. At some point, we have to accept that some children just aren't academic. I was 12. I believed her. So I learned to adapt on my own. Audiobooks became my lifeline. I developed a system of visual notes, diagrams, and flowcharts that helped me process information in ways traditional reading couldn't. And every Sunday afternoon, I took the train to my grandmother Eleanor's apartment on the Upper West Side, where she would sit with me for hours, explaining complicated concepts through stories instead of textbooks. Dulce, she told me once, covering my hand with her weathered fingers, you read slower than most people, but you see things others miss. That's not a disability, sweetheart. That's a different kind of vision. I didn't fully understand what she meant then. Eventually I would. But first, I had to survive another 19 years of being the Whitford family's embarrassing secret. In December 2018, 20 relatives gathered around the mahogany table in my parents' Upper East Side townhouse. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead. Dinner had been catered by a famous chef. It was the annual performance of Whitford family perfection. My father stood at the head of the table with a wineglass raised. I'd like to make an announcement, he said. His voice carrying the boardroom authority he wore like a second skin. Miranda has been accepted to Harvard Law School on a full scholarship. Applause erupted. Cheers filled the room. Miranda blushed with practiced modesty. My eldest daughter, Gerald continued proudly, will be the first Whitford to attend Harvard in 3 generations. She's going to take this family and this company to extraordinary heights. More applause followed. Uncle Richard clapped Miranda on the shoulder. Aunt Catherine dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Then my father's gaze drifted down the table and landed on me. And Dulce, he paused. The warmth in his voice evaporated. Well, Dulce is also here. A few relatives chuckled, soft, uncomfortable laughs, the kind people make when they don't know what else to do. Miranda didn't defend me. She laughed along with them. I stared at my plate as the roasted lamb blurred through the tears I refused to let fall. Then, beneath the table, a hand found mine. Thin fingers, papery skin. Grandma Eleanor, seated across from me, squeezed gently. When I looked up, her eyes held something fierce, something that looked almost like fury directed at her own son. She didn't say anything. Not then. But 3 months later, she called me to her apartment and told me she needed to show me something important. I didn't know it at the time, but that Christmas dinner, that moment of casual cruelty in front of 20 witnesses, had set something in motion. Something that would take 5 years to detonate. After graduating from a state university in 2022, not an Ivy League school, never an Ivy League school, I applied for a position at Whitford Properties. I wanted to prove I could contribute. I wanted to show that the family business could be my path too. My father agreed to hire me as an administrative assistant. My salary was $42,000 a year. That same month, Miranda joined the company as chief legal counsel, earning $280,000 plus bonuses. My job consisted of photocopying documents, booking conference rooms, and fetching coffee for executives who never bothered to learn my name. I wasn't invited to a single meeting. I was never shown a single contract. But I watched and I listened. And during those long hours in the copy room, I discovered something about myself. I could spot patterns other people missed. When executives discussed deals in the hallway, I would sketch diagrams showing the relationships between the parties, the flow of money, and the potential conflicts. A skill I had developed to compensate for my reading difficulties had become something else entirely. Grandma Eleanor had taught me how to see it. During those Sunday afternoons at her apartment, she would spread out old contracts from the company's early days and show me how to read them, not word by word, but as systems and structures. "Your father reads contracts like a lawyer," she told me once in 2019, just before her health began declining. "He looks for what he can exploit. You read them like an architect. You see how all the pieces connect." That same day, Grandma Eleanor handed me a small mahogany box with brass hinges. "Keep this safe," she said. "Don't open it yet. When you need it, you'll know." I took the box home, tucked it into the back of my closet, and tried to forget the strange weight of her words. In March 2019, Grandma Eleanor called me to her apartment. She was 82 then, her once vigorous frame grown thin, her silver hair wispy against the pillow of her armchair, but her eyes, those sharp, knowing eyes, hadn't dimmed at all. "Sit down, Dulce." I sat across from her in the living room where I had spent so many Sunday afternoons. The walls were covered with photographs. Eleanor breaking ground on her first Brooklyn property in 1965, Eleanor shaking hands with Mayor Coe, Eleanor accepting a Women in Business award in 1987. There wasn't a single photograph of my father at the helm. "I built Whitford Properties from nothing," she said, her voice carrying 6 decades of steel. One office, one secretary, 60 years of work. She paused, and something bitter flickered across her face. "Your father inherited it. He didn't build it. He doesn't understand what it means to create something. Grandma, he judges people by their credentials, their degrees, and their ability to perform in boardrooms." She leaned forward. "I judge people by how they treat those who can't fight back. And you, Dulce, you're the only one in this family who knows how to be kind." Then she pressed the wooden box into my hands. "There's something inside that might help you someday, but not yet. You're not ready yet, and neither is Gerald." Her grip tightened around my fingers. "When the time comes, when he shows you exactly who he is, you'll know what to do." I wanted to ask what she meant, what was inside the box, and why she had chosen me, but she changed the subject and started talking about the weather, her garden, and the book she was reading. 18 months later, she was gone. Pancreatic cancer. I was the only family member at her bedside when she died. I held her hand in the hospice room as the woman who had always seen something in me that nobody else could see took her final breath. The box remained unopened in my closet. Then, in April 2024, the email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The subject line read, "Position restructuring, confidential. Dear Ms. Whitford, as part of our ongoing organizational optimization, your current position will be eliminated effective July 1, 2024. HR will contact you regarding severance options." I read it 3 times. The letters swam, rearranged themselves, and finally settled back into the same devastating message. They were firing me. That evening I stayed late, organizing files no one would ever look at again. Through the thin wall separating my cubicle from my father's corner office, I heard voices. "Gerald and Priscilla. We can't have her here when Miranda takes over," my father said. "It looks bad. The CEO's sister working as a secretary. People will ask questions." "What kind of questions?" my mother asked. "Why she's not in leadership. Why we haven't promoted her. Why she's the way she is." Pause followed. Then my mother's voice came, soft and almost gentle. "We've done everything we could for her, Gerald. Some children just don't have what it takes." "Exactly. So she needs to go. We'll give her a generous severance. She can find something else. Something more suited to her abilities." I pressed my palm against the wall. $42,000 a year. My studio apartment in Queens, shared with 2 roommates, cost $1,800 a month. I had no savings and no safety net. If I lost that job, I could be homeless within 2 months. But the money wasn't what made my chest tighten. It was the realization settling into my bones like frost. If I let them do this, if I accepted their version of who I was, I could spend the rest of my life as the family failure. Not because I had actually failed, but because I had never been given the chance to succeed. Miranda's graduation party was tomorrow. And suddenly, I wondered what other announcements my father had planned. On May 15, 2024, the Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom was filled with 350 guests. Business partners, investors, lawyers from white shoe firms, extended family members I barely recognized, and every important person Gerald Whitford wanted to impress. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across silk tablecloths while a 12-piece orchestra played Gershwin in the corner. This was Gerald Whitford's kingdom. His stage, the place where he performed his role as patriarch, mogul, and the man who had everything. I stood near the entrance, tugging nervously at the hem of my dress. It was black, simple, and cost $79 from Zara, the most I could afford on my salary. Everyone else glittered in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. My mother intercepted me before I could find my seat. "Dulce." Priscilla's gaze traveled from my drugstore makeup to my scuffed heels, and her lips pressed into a thin line. "You couldn't find anything nicer. This is what I have." "Well." She adjusted her Cartier bracelet. "You'll be at table 27, near the service entrance. Try not to draw attention to yourself." "Of course. And Dulce." She leaned closer, her Chanel No. 5 overwhelming the air between us. "Tonight is Miranda's night. Whatever you're feeling, whatever resentment you think you're entitled to, keep it to yourself. Don't embarrass us." Then she walked away before I could respond. Table 27 was at the back of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a pillar. I sat down alone, surrounded by strangers, while across the room my sister Miranda stood beneath the golden lights, accepting congratulations for a future my parents had spent 20 years building for her. I had been told I was too slow, too difficult, too incapable, and too embarrassing to matter. But somewhere in the back of my closet, inside a locked mahogany box, my grandmother had left me something that could destroy every lie my family had ever told about me. And tomorrow, at Miranda's graduation celebration, in front of 350 witnesses, someone I had never seen before was going to hand me an envelope that would finally reveal why Eleanor Whitford had been waiting for this exact moment. My table mates were distant cousins I had met maybe twice in my entire life. From my seat, I could see the main stage, the massive portrait of Miranda in her Harvard regalia, and the banner proudly declaring, "Congratulations, Miranda Whitford, Harvard Law, Class of 2024. But near the entrance, standing alone beside the door, was a silver-haired man in a gray suit. He wasn't mingling. He wasn't eating. He was simply watching. Then his eyes found mine across the crowded ballroom, and something cold prickled down my spine. At exactly 8:30 p.m., the orchestra stopped. The lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the stage, where my father stood with a champagne flute raised in his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate an extraordinary young woman." The applause began before he even finished the sentence. Miranda graduated in the top 5% of her Harvard Law class. She completed a clerkship with Justice Reynolds, and last month, she earned a partner-track position at Sullivan & Cromwell in record time. Gerald's voice swelled with pride. "But tonight, I'm not just celebrating her achievements. I'm announcing her future." Miranda joined him on stage, radiant in an emerald Valentino gown. Then my father smiled. "Effective immediately, Miranda Whitford will inherit my entire estate upon my passing. This includes our family residence at 740 Park Avenue, currently valued at $13 million, my Tesla Model S Plaid, and most importantly," he paused for effect, "the position of CEO of Whitford Properties when I retire." The room erupted. A standing ovation thundered through the ballroom as camera flashes exploded from every direction. Miranda dabbed at her eyes with practiced grace. 350 people celebrated her future, and not one of them glanced toward table 27. The distant cousin beside me, a woman I had met at a funeral 8 years earlier, leaned toward me. "Dulce, right? So, what does that mean for you?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. What could I say? That I had just been publicly erased from my own family. That the termination letter sitting in my inbox was only the beginning. That every fear I had carried for 20 years, that I was worthless, that I was the family failure, that I would never be enough, had just been confirmed in front of everyone who mattered. The applause slowly faded. Miranda hugged our father. Cameras continued clicking. And then the silver-haired man by the door began walking toward me. Slowly, deliberately, like he had been waiting for this exact moment. He stopped beside my table. Up close, I realized he was older than I had first thought, probably in his early 60s, with deep-set eyes and the careful posture of someone who had spent a lifetime in courtrooms. "Miss Whitford." "That's me." I straightened in my chair. "Can I help you?" "My name is Jonathan Ellis." He reached into his breast pocket and handed me a cream-colored embossed business card. "Morrison and Blake, attorneys at law. I was your grandmother's lawyer." The words hit me like a punch. My grandmother, Eleanor. She passed away 3 years ago. "I'm aware." He didn't sit down. He didn't soften his expression. "She left something for you, with very specific instructions about when it was to be delivered." From inside his jacket, he produced a heavy cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax and bearing a notary stamp. I stared at it. "What is this?" His voice dropped. "Her will. The real one." My breath caught. "The one your father doesn't know exists." My eyes locked onto the notary seal. Morrison and Blake. September 12, 2019. 5 months after that Sunday afternoon in my grandmother's apartment. 5 months after she had handed me the small wooden box and told me to keep it safe. "I don't understand." "Your grandmother gave me explicit instructions," Ellis said. "I was to deliver this document on the day your father publicly disinherited you." He glanced toward the stage, where Gerald and Miranda were still basking in the applause. "I believe that day has just arrived." My hands trembled as I accepted the envelope. "Mr. Ellis, what's in here?" For the first time, something almost like warmth flickered in his eyes. "Mrs. Eleanor told me to tell you this. Give this to Dulce on the day Gerald shows her exactly who he is. By then, she'll be ready." He straightened his tie. "I'll be available when you have questions. You have my card." Then he turned and disappeared into the crowd. I couldn't breathe in that ballroom anymore. I pushed through the service entrance and found an empty hallway near the kitchen. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while the sounds of celebration faded into a distant, muffled hum. My fingers shook as I broke the red wax seal. Inside were 3 pages of dense legal text, a notarized signature, and a date, September 12, 2019. I read slowly and carefully. The letters swam across the page, but I forced them into focus. "I, Eleanor Margaret Whitford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous testamentary documents and declare this to be my last will and testament." My eyes moved down the page. Then I saw the paragraph that made my entire body go cold. "To my granddaughter, Dulce Ann Whitford, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties LLC, currently valued at approximately $47 million, together with all voting rights associated therewith." I read the sentence again, then a third time. $47 million. 51% of Whitford Properties. All voting rights. The company my father had just promised to Miranda. The company my family had spent 20 years telling me I was too stupid to understand. And suddenly, I realized the woman they had called the slow one had just inherited control of the entire Whitford empire. I read it again. Then again. 51%. Controlling interest. The will continued. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Gerald's treatment of Dulce. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity. Not because she lacks ability, but because she was denied support. Dulce is not slow. Dulce was abandoned. And I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death. A sob caught in my throat. Grandma had seen it. She had seen everything. Then I reached the next paragraph. Condition. To activate this bequest, Dulce must formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving this document. Failure to act within this window will render this will null and void, and all assets shall transfer according to my 2015 testament. 72 hours. The deadline was 8:30 p.m. on May 18th. I leaned against the cold hallway wall, the document clutched against my chest. My grandmother had given me a weapon. Now I had to decide whether I was brave enough to use it. When I emerged from the hallway, Jonathan Ellis was waiting near the coat check. He looked at my face and immediately knew. You read it. The 72-hour clause. My voice cracked. Why would she put that in? Your grandmother knew you, Miss Whitford. He handed me a second card. This one had a personal cell number handwritten on the back. She knew that if she gave you unlimited time, you might convince yourself not to act. The deadline isn't a punishment. It's permission. I stared at him. Permission. Permission to stop waiting for your family to change their minds about you. Permission to take what is rightfully yours. He checked his watch. The deadline is 8:30 p.m. on May 18th, 3 days from now. If you want to proceed, you'll need to submit a formal request for an emergency board meeting. I can help you draft it. Through the ballroom doors, I could see my father still standing on stage, posing for photographs with Miranda. My mother moved through the guests, accepting congratulations as though she had personally earned them. If I did this, if I invoked Grandma's will, I could destroy whatever relationship I had left with my family. My parents would never forgive me. Miranda would call it betrayal. But if I stayed silent, I would be accepting their verdict. I would become exactly what they had always called me. The failure, the slow one, the daughter who didn't matter. Miss Whitford. Ellis's voice pulled me out of my spiral. Your grandmother believed in you. She spent the last 3 years of her life preparing for this moment. The question is, do you believe in yourself? I looked down at the will in my hands, at the elegant signature of the woman who had held my hand beneath Christmas tables and taught me to read contracts like architecture. Then I looked back at him. I'll call you tomorrow, I said. We're requesting that board meeting. Ellis allowed himself a small smile. She said you would. I'm going to pause here for just a moment. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in you, if you've ever been dismissed, ignored, or made to feel like you weren't enough, comment the word enough below. Let me know I'm not alone in this. And if you want to see what happened when I walked into that boardroom, keep watching because we're just getting started. Now back to the story. That night, back in my cramped Queens apartment, I finally opened the wooden box. My roommates were asleep. The only light came from the street lamp outside my window, casting orange stripes across my bed as I sat cross-legged with a mahogany box in my lap. The brass hinges creaked when I lifted the lid. Inside was a handwritten letter on Eleanor's personal stationery, a faded document bearing a 1965 date stamp, and a sleek modern USB drive that had clearly been added years later. I reached for the letter first. My dearest Dulce, if you're reading this, then Jonathan has done his job, and your father has done exactly what I feared he would. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive, but I can protect you now. The enclosed document is the original partnership agreement from 1965, when I founded Whitford Properties with 2 colleagues who have long since passed away. Your father has never seen it. It establishes that the founder's shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted or transferred without board approval. The USB contains something else, something your father hoped I had forgotten. In 2018, Gerald proposed a resolution to reduce my voting rights from 51% to 10%. His stated reason was that I was too old to understand modern business. The real reason was simple. He wanted control, and I was standing in his way. The board rejected his proposal by 2 votes. I was one of those votes. I never forgot what he tried to do. And I never forgave him for the way he treated you to justify it, as though diminishing you somehow proved that I was unfit. Use this wisely, Dulce. Not for revenge. For justice. All my love, Grandma Eleanor. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. A single file appeared on the screen. Board meeting minutes, March 2018. PDF. My father's attempt to strip his own mother of power. Documented. Timestamp. Evidence. Opened it. The first page showed the date and attendees. The second contained the proposed resolution. And then I found the line that made my hands go cold. May 16, 2018. 9 a.m. Margaret Coleman answered on the second ring. Ring. Dulce Whitford. Her voice carried the rasp of someone who had smoked for decades and laughed even longer. I've been wondering when you'd call. You know who I am. Sweetheart, your grandmother and I built half of Brooklyn together in the 70s. She talked about you constantly. There was a pause. She also told me about the will 3 years ago, right before she passed. I gripped my phone tighter. Then you know what I'm about to do. I know what you're considering doing. There's a difference. Margaret's tone shifted, becoming sharper and more businesslike. You want to request an emergency board meeting. That requires 3 board members to sign the petition. 1. You'll need 2 more. Can you help me find them? I can do better than that. I heard papers shuffling in the background. Gerald Whitford isn't as popular as he thinks. His management style is, let's call it, autocratic. At least 4 board members have privately expressed concerns. They just need someone to go first. Hope sparked in my chest. Who? Richard Holloway. Susan Parker. A pause. They've both been on the receiving end of Gerald's temper during closed sessions. I'll make some calls. Another pause. Then her voice softened. Dulce, I need you to understand something. This isn't going to be pleasant. Your father will fight. Your sister will fight. They'll say terrible things. They've been saying terrible things about me my whole life. At least now I get to respond. Margaret laughed. A warm, genuine sound. Eleanor always said you had steel underneath all that quiet. I'm starting to see what she meant. She cleared her throat. I'll have the petition ready by tonight. Board meeting request. May 18th, 10 a.m., Whitford Tower, 42nd floor. Thank you, Margaret. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're sitting in that boardroom. The next day, May 17th, Gerald found out about the meeting at exactly 4 p.m. I know because Miranda called me 45 minutes later. Her voice tight with controlled fury. What did you do? I was sitting in my cubicle at Whitford Properties, pretending to organize files. I don't know what you're talking about. Dad just got a notice from the board secretary. Emergency meeting tomorrow. Requested by Margaret Coleman and 2 other directors. Was. Sharp as broken glass. Margaret Coleman hasn't requested anything in 15 years. What did you do? Maybe she has concerns about company management. Don't play games with me, Dulce. Miranda's composure cracked. If you're trying to embarrass us, if you're trying to make some kind of scene, I'm just doing my job, Miranda. Same as always. She hung up without saying goodbye. 20 minutes later, Gerald stormed past my cubicle on his way to his office. He didn't look at me. He didn't acknowledge that I existed. He simply slammed his door hard enough to rattle the windows. Through the wall I heard him on the phone. Ridiculous waste of time. Margaret's probably going senile. We'll address her concerns and move on. No, I'm not worried. Dulce. My God, Miranda, she can barely read a spreadsheet. She's not a threat to anyone. Smiled. For the first time in 28 years, being underestimated felt like an advantage. That night, back in my apartment, I prepared everything. I printed 3 copies of the will. I downloaded the 2018 board minutes onto my phone as a backup. I wrote a brief statement. Not an accusation, just a clear presentation of facts. Jonathan Ellis confirmed that he would attend as the attorney authenticating the will. At 11 p.m., Margaret texted me. Petition filed. See you tomorrow. Your grandmother would be proud. I barely slept, but for once, anxiety wasn't what kept me awake. It was anticipation. May 18, 2024. 9:45 a.m. Whitford Tower. The elevator opened onto the 42nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Italian marble. The kind of corporate opulence designed to intimidate before anyone even said a word. I stepped out wearing a borrowed gray blazer from one of my roommates, 2 sizes too big, and carrying a leather portfolio I'd bought at Goodwill for $12. At the boardroom door, the security guard held up his hand. Name: Dulce Whitford. He checked his tablet, frowned, and looked back at me. You're not on the authorized attendee list. I'm a Whitford Properties employee, and I have business with the board. Ma'am, this is a restricted meeting. I can't let you in. Is there a problem? Miranda's voice came from behind me. Turn. She looked immaculate. Navy power suit, Hermes scarf, the uniform of someone who belonged in boardrooms. Dulce. Miranda's smile didn't reach her eyes. What are you doing here? I have information to present to the board. Information. Miranda laughed, a sharp, performative sound. About what? You work in the copy room. The nature of my presentation is confidential. You don't even know what ROI stands for. Return on investment, I said. It's not that complicated. Miranda's smile flickered. Before she could respond, our father appeared at the end of the hallway, flanked by 2 senior executives. What's going on here? Dulce wants to attend the board meeting, Miranda said. I was just explaining that's not possible. Gerald looked at me the way he always did, like I was a stain he couldn't quite scrub out. Dulce, go back to your desk. This doesn't concern you. Actually, a voice called from inside the boardroom. It does. Margaret Coleman appeared in the doorway. At 72, silver-haired and perfectly composed, she carried the quiet authority of someone who had been building empires when Gerald was still in diapers. I invited her. She has standing to address the board. Margaret looked directly at me. Let her in. Gerald's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought he might physically block the door. But Margaret Coleman had been a board member for 32 years, and her authority in that room exceeded his. Fine, my father said, his voice turning cold. Let her speak. We'll see how long it takes before she embarrasses herself. The boardroom was smaller than I had imagined. An oval table of polished walnut, 12 leather chairs, and portraits of past executives lining the walls. Then I noticed my grandmother Eleanor's portrait above the fireplace. Her painted eyes seemed to watch over the room. The 12 board members took their seats. Gerald sat at the head of the table. Miranda sat to his right, not officially a board member yet, but positioned as though she already belonged there. I was directed to a chair at the far end, the children's table of corporate governance. In the corner, Jonathan Ellis sat with his briefcase. He caught my eye and nodded once. Robert Hartley, the board chairman, a distinguished man in his mid-60s who had known my grandmother for decades, called the meeting to order. This emergency session was requested by Margaret Coleman, Richard Holloway, and Susan Parker. Margaret, you have the floor. Margaret rose. Thank you, Robert. I'll keep my remarks brief. She gestured toward me. The matter I wish to address concerns a document that has recently come to light, a document that affects the ownership structure of this company. I yield my time to Miss Dulce Whitford. Every eye in the room turned toward me. Miranda smirked. Gerald leaned back in his chair with theatrical boredom. Understood. My hands were steadier than I expected. Thank you, Mrs. Coleman, and thank you to the board for allowing me to speak. What I'm about to present may come as a surprise to some of you. I ask only that you listen to the evidence before reaching any conclusions. Gerald sighed loudly. I ignored him. Before I could continue, my father raised his hand. I'm sorry, Robert, but before we waste the board's valuable time. Gerald stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate slowness. I need to provide some context. Gerald, Margaret began, but he continued. Dulce is my daughter, he said, using the patronizing warmth he reserved for difficult clients. And I love her. But she isn't qualified to address this board on any business matter. She works in an administrative role. She has no legal training, no financial background, and no strategic experience. Miranda joined in, her tone dripping with false sympathy. Dulce also has dyslexia. She struggles with reading. We've tried to support her, but, she shrugged elegantly. Some limitations can't be overcome with effort alone. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. What we're seeing here, Gerald continued, is a troubled young woman acting out, perhaps because of the announcement at Miranda's graduation party. Sibling jealousy is. Mr. Whitford. Robert Hartley's voice cut through the room like a gavel. You'll have an opportunity to respond, but Miss Whitford requested this time, and she is entitled to use it. Gerald sat down, his expression promising consequences. Miranda caught my eye and mouthed, "You're embarrassing yourself." I looked at them both, my father, my sister, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Something colder, clearer. They weren't trying to protect me. They weren't even trying to protect the company. They were trying to protect their version of the story, the version where I was nothing. Thank you, Mr. Hartley. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out the document. I won't be discussing my reading ability today. I'll be discussing this. I held up the will. The room went silent. This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Margaret Whitford, founder of this company, notarized on September 12, 2019. Gerald's face drained of color. That's impossible. Gerald's voice came out strangled. My mother's will was executed in 2015. I have a copy. You have a copy of her previous will, I said, keeping my voice level and clinical. Under New York Estates Powers and Trusts law, a subsequent valid will can revoke prior testamentary documents. This will, I placed it firmly on the table, was executed 4 years after the one you possess. I slid the document toward Robert Hartley. Mr. Ellis, I said, gesturing toward Jonathan, who rose from his seat in the corner. Would you please confirm the authenticity of this document? Jonathan approached the table. I'm Jonathan Ellis, a partner at Morrison & Blake. I served as Eleanor Whitford's personal attorney from 2008 until her death in 2021. I can confirm that this will was executed in my presence on September 12, 2019. It was witnessed by 2 independent witnesses, properly notarized, and the original is held in secure custody at Chase Private Client. Robert Hartley studied the document, his eyebrows rising as he reached the relevant section. This will bequeaths 51% of Whitford properties to. He looked up at me. To you, Miss Whitford. Murmurs rippled around the table. That's a forgery, Miranda said, but the confidence had vanished from her voice. It isn't, Jonathan replied immediately. And I would advise you against making accusations of fraud without evidence, Miss Whitford. Morrison & Blake's reputation speaks for itself. Gerald slammed his palm onto the table. This is absurd. My mother was ill. She was being manipulated. Manipulated. I reached for my phone. Perhaps you'd like to explain this. Press play. The 2018 board meeting recording filled the room with my father's voice. Eleanor is 81 years old. She doesn't understand modern business. I moved to reduce her voting rights to 10%. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. That recording. Gerald's face had turned a mottled purple. That was a private board discussion. A discussion Eleanor attended, I replied, keeping my voice steady. She recorded it as a shareholder and participant in the meeting. Robert Hartley slowly set down the will, his expression shifting from neutral to something far harder. Miss Whitford, would you read the relevant passage aloud for the record? I nodded and took a breath. To my granddaughter Dulce and Whitford, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties LLC, along with all voting rights associated therewith. I paused, allowing the words to settle over the room. Then I continued. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Gerald's treatment of Dulce. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity. Not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support. Dulce is not slow. Dulce was abandoned. And I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death. A choking sound escaped Miranda. I looked directly at my father. Gerald has confused credentials with character and degrees with worth. He tried to strip his own mother of her voting rights because she saw through him. He marginalized me because I reminded him of the kind of person he refuses to be. Gerald said nothing. His hands were trembling. I continued reading. I built this company from nothing. I choose who carries it forward. I choose Dulce. Robert Hartley removed his reading glasses. Jonathan, can you confirm that this document is legally binding? I can, Jonathan replied. The 2015 will is superseded. As of this moment, Dulce Whitford is the majority shareholder of Whitford Properties. Margaret Coleman smiled quietly. Richard Holloway and Susan Parker exchanged a glance. And for the first time in my life, I watched my father look at me with something other than dismissal. It was fear. This doesn't prove anything, Miranda said, though her voice had turned brittle. Even if the will is valid, which we will contest, Dulce has no business experience. She can't run a company. I'm not asking to run the company, I replied, turning toward the full board. I'm asking you to examine the facts. I pulled the 2018 board minutes from my portfolio. March 14, 2018. Gerald Whitford proposed Resolution 2018-07 to reduce Eleanor Whitford's voting shares from 51% to 10%. His stated rationale was, I found the passage. The founder is no longer capable of understanding modern business operations. That was taken out of context, Gerald snapped. The resolution failed by 2 votes, I continued. Eleanor's vote and Margaret Coleman's. I looked at Margaret. Is that accurate? Margaret nodded slowly. It is. Eleanor called me that night. She was devastated. Not because she thought the resolution would pass, but because her own son had tried to take everything she had built. This is ancient history, Gerald began. It's evidence, I cut him off. Evidence that my grandmother was not suffering from diminished capacity when she created the 2019 will. She was protecting herself from her own son, and she was protecting me from the family that spent my entire life convincing me I was incapable of protecting myself. She was protecting me. Robert Hartley looked around the table. Does anyone have documentation that contradicts what has been presented? Silence. Gerald's jaw tightened, but no words came. Miranda stared down at the table. Her perfect composure completely shattered. Richard Holloway finally spoke. Robert, I think we need to recess and have legal counsel review these documents. Agreed. Hartley checked his watch. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. Jonathan, please remain available. The board members rose, breaking into quiet conversations as they left the room. Gerald didn't move. He remained frozen in his chair, staring at his mother's portrait on the wall. I wondered if, somewhere in that moment, he could feel her watching him. 15 minutes stretched into 45. The company's legal counsel, a thin man named Patterson whom I had never met, spent the entire time on the phone with Morrison and Blake, Chase private client, and the New York State Court Records Office. I sat alone at the end of the table while Jonathan Ellis brought me a glass of water. Margaret Coleman passed by and gently patted my shoulder. Across the room, Gerald and Miranda huddled together, their whispered argument growing increasingly heated. Finally, Patterson returned to the table and leaned toward Robert Hartley, speaking quietly into his ear. Hartley's expression flickered from surprise to disbelief, then finally to resignation. "Please take your seats," he said. The board members filed back into the room. The tension had crystallized into something brittle, something that felt as if it might shatter with a single word. Robert Hartley looked down at his notes. "Our legal counsel has confirmed the following. The will presented by Miss Whitford is valid under New York state law and supersedes all previous testamentary documents. Effective immediately, Dulce Whitford holds a 51% controlling interest in Whitford properties." Someone inhaled sharply. Hartley continued. "Additionally, as the majority shareholder, Miss Whitford has the right to propose motions to the board, including matters pertaining to executive leadership." He looked directly at me. "Miss Whitford, do you have any motions you wish to bring forward?" Understood. My heart was pounding, but my voice remained steady. "I have one motion." Gerald immediately rose from his chair. "Robert, this is—" "Sit down, Gerald." Hartley's voice carried an unexpected steel. "Miss Whitford has the floor." Gerald slowly sat back down. His face had gone gray. I looked around the table at the 12 people who, until an hour earlier, had never considered me capable of anything. Now they were waiting for my decision. The power to end my father's career was in my hands. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about everything she had taught me. And then I made my choice. I am not proposing to remove Gerald Whitford as CEO. The tension in the room shifted instantly. Miranda's head snapped up. Even Margaret Coleman looked surprised. "What I am proposing," I continued, "is a vote of confidence. The board will decide whether Gerald Whitford retains its confidence in him as CEO of Whitford Properties. If the majority votes no confidence, he will be required to resign. If the majority votes confidence, I will not interfere with operational leadership during my tenure as majority shareholder." "This is absurd." Miranda stood. "You're turning this into a spectacle, a revenge fantasy." I met her eyes. "No, this is corporate governance. The same process that exists in every well-run company. The same process Grandma Eleanor established in our bylaws 40 years ago." Pause. "If Dad has the board's confidence, then he has nothing to worry about." Robert Hartley studied me for a long moment. Something that looked almost like respect flickered in his expression. "Is there a second for this motion?" "Seconded." Margaret Coleman didn't hesitate. "Then we'll vote." Hartley looked around the table. "All those expressing confidence in Gerald Whitford as CEO, raise your hands." 4 hands went up. 4 loyal allies, people whose board seats had been secured through Gerald's recommendations. All those expressing no confidence. 7 hands rose. Robert Hartley counted them twice before setting down his pen. "The motion carries 7-4 with 1 abstention." He turned toward my father. "Mr. Whitford, the board has voted no confidence. Under Section 14.3 of the company bylaws, you have 30 days to tender your resignation." Gerald said nothing. He slowly stood and looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time in my life, I expected rage, hatred, threats, or some final cruel insult. What I saw was worse. Recognition. The dawning realization that he had underestimated me so completely that he had lost everything. He walked out without saying a word. And I know what some of you may be thinking right now. Why didn't she simply fire him? Why give him the chance to keep his job? Because revenge is not justice. Because destroying someone does not undo what they did to you. And because my grandmother had not spent her final years preparing me to become another Gerald Whitford. She had given me power for a reason, not to abuse it but to use it wisely. For the first time in my life, I had the ability to decide what happened next. And instead of becoming the person my family had always feared I might become, I chose to become the person my grandmother had always believed I could be. Because my grandmother didn't raise me to be cruel. She raised me to be fair. And if that resonates with you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because this story isn't over. Not even close. Now, back to what happened after the boardroom cleared. Gerald caught me in the private corridor outside the boardroom. Priscilla was with him. Someone must have called her during the recess. Her face was streaked with tears, mascara running down her cheeks. "You!" Gerald's voice was barely controlled. "You ungrateful, scheming Gerald." Priscilla placed a hand on his arm. "Not here. Not here." He laughed bitterly. "She just destroyed our family in front of 12 people. I stood my ground. I didn't destroy anything. I told the truth." "The truth?" Gerald laughed again, but there was no humor in it. "Your grandmother was manipulated. That lawyer Ellis, he must have. Grandma Eleanor wrote that 5 months after you tried to strip her of her power because she saw exactly who you were." My voice didn't waver. "You didn't lose because I betrayed you. You lost because you betrayed her." Priscilla stepped forward. "Dulce, sweetheart, you have to understand. We were trying to protect you. You've always struggled. We didn't want to put pressure on you. You didn't protect me." I looked directly at her. "You erased me." 28 years of silence crystallized into words. Every Christmas dinner, every family photo, every conversation where you talked about Miranda's achievements and pretended I didn't exist. That wasn't protection. That was abandonment. "That's not fair," my mother whispered. "You're right." I met her eyes. "It wasn't fair. I spent my whole life trying to prove I was worthy of this family. I'm done proving it. The documents speak for themselves." Gerald stepped forward and grabbed my arm. "This isn't over. We'll contest that will." Pulled free. "You'll lose. And you know it. Grandma Eleanor planned for every contingency, including this one." I turned toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice. "Dulce, wait." I didn't. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their permission to leave. The elevator doors closed on my parents' faces. I leaned against the brushed steel wall and finally allowed myself to breathe. The adrenaline that had carried me through the past 2 hours began to fade, leaving something unexpected in its wake. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Grief. I had just severed 28 years of hoping things would change. Of believing that if I was patient enough, quiet enough, good enough, my parents would eventually see me and love me the way they loved Miranda. That hope was dead now. And I had killed it myself. The elevator descended 42 floors. By the time it reached the lobby, I had wiped my eyes and straightened my borrowed blazer. Jonathan Ellis was waiting near the security desk. That was... He searched for the right word. Remarkable. It was necessary. Your grandmother would agree. He fell into step beside me as I walked toward the exit. What happens now? Now I go home, sleep, and try to figure out what my life looks like without the family I thought I had, and without the company I never asked to inherit. We stopped at the revolving doors. I don't want to be CEO, I continued. I never did. I just want the company my grandmother built to be run by people who actually care about it, not people who see it as their personal inheritance. Ellis nodded slowly. The board will want to meet with you to discuss transition plans and your role going forward. I know. But not today. I pushed through the revolving doors, and Manhattan sunlight hit my face. Today, I just need to be Dulce Whitford. Not a shareholder. Not a victim. Not a symbol. I glanced back at Whitford Tower, 42 stories of glass and steel bearing my family's name. Tomorrow, I said quietly, I'll start building something new. On May 19, 2024, Gerald Whitford signed his resignation letter at 4 p.m. I wasn't there. I learned about it through an email from Robert Hartley. Miss Whitford, your father has tendered his resignation, effective June 15, 2024. The board has appointed me interim CEO while we conduct a search for permanent leadership. Additionally, the board has voted to offer you a formal position as strategic advisor to the board. This role would allow you to participate in major decisions while you determine your long-term relationship with the company. Please let me know your thoughts. Regards, Robert Hartley. I read the email 3 times. Habit. Then I forwarded it to Jonathan Ellis for review. His response came within an hour. Fair offer. No hidden strings. Congratulations, Dulce. That evening, an all-staff email went out to the Whitford Properties team. Effective June 15, 2024, Gerald Whitford will step down as CEO. Robert Hartley will serve as interim CEO. Additionally, the board welcomes Dulce Whitford as strategic advisor to the board, effective immediately. I stared at my name on the screen for a long moment. Dulce Whitford, strategic advisor, majority shareholder. The same woman my family had spent 28 years calling slow, incapable, and unworthy. I closed the email and looked out at the Manhattan skyline. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had finally become someone important. I felt like I had finally stopped waiting for someone else to tell me that I was. Dulce Whitford as strategic advisor to the board, in her capacity as majority shareholder. We thank Gerald for his years of service and wish him well in his future endeavors. My phone immediately began buzzing with messages. Colleagues I had worked beside for 2 years, people who had never bothered to learn my name, suddenly wanted to have coffee, reconnect, and catch up. I ignored most of them. But one message stood out. It was from Patricia Morales, an executive assistant who had started at Whitford Properties in 1987 and had worked directly with my grandmother. Dulce, Eleanor used to talk about you constantly. She said you saw things other people missed. I never understood what she meant until today. Welcome to the boardroom. She would be so proud. I saved the message. Some validation doesn't come from family. Sometimes that makes it mean even more. 1 week later, the story went public. The headline in the New York Business Journal read, Whitford Properties Shakeup. Founder's granddaughter takes control after secret will surfaces. The article didn't name me directly. Corporate privacy laws prevented that. But anyone in Manhattan's real estate circles knew exactly who it was about. In a dramatic turn of events, the heir apparent to the Whitford Properties empire has been displaced by a previously unknown family member. Sources close to the board describe the transition as long overdue and cite concerns about the former CEO's management style. Gerald and Priscilla cancelled their appearance at the Metropolitan Museum Gala. Health reasons, their publicist claimed. 3 investment partners requested meetings with me personally. Not with my father, not with the board, but with me. After an hour-long conversation with each of them, 2 confirmed that they would continue their relationships with Whitford Properties. We've had concerns about Gerald's leadership for years, one admitted. Your grandmother built something special. It's good to see her vision protected. The social fallout rippled outward. Friends of my parents suddenly remembered previous engagements. Invitations to charity events began disappearing. The Whitford name, which had once opened almost every door on the Upper East Side, now carried an asterisk. I didn't celebrate their humiliation, but I didn't mourn it either. Then, on a Saturday morning, Margaret Coleman called me. How are you holding up? I don't know yet. Ask me in 6 months. Fair enough. There was a pause. Eleanor would have handled this exactly the same way, you know. The vote of confidence instead of immediate termination. Giving him a chance he didn't deserve. She laughed softly. She always said mercy was the ultimate power move. I thought about that long after we hung up. Mercy wasn't weakness. Mercy was choice. And for the first time in my life, the choice had been mine. On June 8, 2024, 3 weeks after the board meeting, my phone rang at 2 p.m., Dulce. My mother's voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. Can we talk? Just us. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in Midtown. Neutral territory. No chance of Gerald appearing with lawyers. Priscilla was already there when I arrived. She looked older somehow. Her careful makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion beneath it. Thank you for coming. She wrapped both hands around a cup she hadn't touched. I know I don't deserve this. What do you want, Mom? To apologize. The word came out cracked. For everything. For the way we treated you. For the things we said. For the things we didn't say. I studied her. Are you apologizing because you're sorry, or because everything changed? She flinched. The question hung between us like smoke. Both, she finally admitted. I'm ashamed to say it, but both. Her eyes filled with tears. I was so focused on Miranda's success and on maintaining appearances. I told myself we were protecting you from expectations you couldn't meet. But that was a lie. I told myself that because it was easier than admitting I had failed you. My voice stayed quiet. You let Dad call me worthless in front of family members and business partners. You never defended me. Not once. I know. A tear slipped down her cheek. I know, and I can never undo it. But, Dulce, I don't want to lose you completely. I don't know if that's even possible anymore, but I had to try. I looked at the woman who had been my mother for 28 years. The woman who had braided my hair when I was a child and forgotten my birthday when I became an adult. I can't pretend the last 28 years didn't happen, I said slowly. But I'm willing to try building something new. Something honest. She nodded, unable to speak. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a beginning. 2 months later, in August 2024, Miranda called me while I was walking through Central Park. I almost didn't answer. Dulce, I know I have no right to ask this, but can we meet? There's something I need to say. We sat on a bench near Bethesda Fountain. The August heat pressed down like a weight. Miranda looked different. The armor of perfection she had worn her entire life had finally begun to crack. There were dark circles beneath her eyes, and her hair was pulled back carelessly, as if she no longer had the energy to maintain the flawless image everyone had always expected from her. For the first time, I looked at my sister and wondered what she was finally ready to say. Carelessly, she said. I've been in therapy. She said it without any preamble. Since May. 3 times a week. That's good. It's brutal. She laughed without humor. Turns out being the golden child isn't actually a gift. It's a different kind of cage. Waited. Dad expected me to be perfect. Every grade, every achievement, every award was never enough. It was just the baseline for whatever came next. She stared at the fountain. And the way they treated you. I told myself it was just how things were. That you were different. That I was protecting you by not challenging them. You weren't protecting me. No, she finally looked at me. I was protecting myself. Because if I defended you, I became a target too. Her voice softened. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. What do you want from me, Miranda? Nothing. I don't deserve anything. Her voice cracked. I just wanted you to know that I see you now. Really see you. And I'm sorry I didn't look sooner. We sat in silence. 2 sisters who had grown up in the same house but had spent most of our lives as strangers. I can't go back to how things were, I said finally. But I'm not interested in staying enemies either. Maybe we start over from scratch. Miranda's eyes filled with tears. I'd like that. It wasn't the sister relationship I had dreamed about as a child. But maybe, for the first time, it could become something real. By November 2024, 6 months after the board meeting, I had moved into my own apartment in Brooklyn Heights. It was a 1-bedroom apartment in a pre-war building with a view of the bridge my grandmother had crossed on her way to her first office in 1965. The rent was more than I had ever paid before, but I could afford it now. My new position at Whitford Properties was Director of Sustainable Development, with a salary of $185,000 a year, plus dividends from my shares. The title had been my idea. I wanted to create a division focused on green building practices, sustainable real estate, and environmental impact assessments, the kind of innovation my grandmother would have championed if she had lived to see it. Gerald called once a month now. The conversations were short and polite. He asked about the weather, my apartment, and my work. We both pretended the past had never happened. For now, that was easier. Priscilla and I had lunch every other week. Slowly and awkwardly, she was learning to see me as a person instead of a problem. It wasn't the mother-daughter relationship I had dreamed of, but it was honest, and that was more than we had ever had before. Miranda and I got coffee on some weekends. We were learning about each other, really learning about each other, for the first time. She told me about the pressure she had carried. I told her about the loneliness I had hidden. Neither of us pretended the past was okay. But we were writing a new story. On the wall of my apartment, I hung my grandmother's portrait, the same portrait that had watched over the Whitford boardroom for 40 years. Sometimes, when the evening light hit it just right, I could almost see her smiling. "You did it, Grandma," I would think. "You gave me the tools. I just had to be brave enough to use them." 6 months earlier I had been invisible. Now, for the first time, I was completely myself. Looking back, I understand something I couldn't have understood at 27. My grandmother didn't leave me 51% of her company because I was better than Miranda. She left it to me because she knew I wouldn't let power corrupt me the way it had corrupted my father. Dyslexia is not my flaw. It is part of who I am. Just like my visual memory, my patience, and my ability to see patterns other people miss. The things that made me seem slow in my parents' eyes were the same things that allowed me to see the truth when everyone else looked away. Gerald judged worth by credentials, degrees, and performance. Eleanor judged worth by character, kindness, and the way people treated those who couldn't fight back. And now, finally, I get to decide my own worth. Not by what my parents say. Not by what my sister achieved. Not by what any stranger on the internet thinks. By my own standards. My own measure. My own truth. And if you're watching this and recognize yourself in my story, if you've ever been the overlooked one, the dismissed one, the person everyone said would never amount to anything, I want you to remember something. You don't need a secret inheritance to prove your value. But you do need to give yourself permission to stop seeking approval from people who will never give it to you. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors. They allow you to decide who gets access to your life, and on what terms. My family hurt me for 28 years, but I didn't need to hurt them back to find peace. I simply needed to stop waiting for them to see me and start seeing myself. That was the real inheritance my grandmother left me. And nobody could ever take it away. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that your worth is not determined by the people who failed to see it, I want to hear from you. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a comment telling me your story. And if you want more stories about ordinary people who found the courage to stand up for themselves, check the link in the description. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Until next time.